morning, everybody, and thank you very much for this warm welcome and introduction. It's a pleasure to be here at Media Conference and present this morning a topic which is basically kind of a research I've been involved in over the last 10 years, but now in the last few years just started to involve and skyrocket in terms of media awareness as well. So my talk today, a holistic view on learning analytics, might also produce some fear in somebody here in the room because it's all about quantitative data, it's about big data. But on the other side, I would also say it's an opportunity for us also researchers who are qualitatively oriented to go into this and think about the individual, the learner, and this is exactly what a qualitative approach is. So I'm not only talking about the big data aspects, I'm also talking about the individual and the learner and what the learner's progression over time is focused on. So let me start with the idea of disruptive education, and you're all in this field of education technology for a long time. You're all experts in the field, and I saw the amazing program which is presented over the last or the next 3 days. So, and you're all familiar with this. Disruptive education has been there since technology was taking over the education field, and I just show you some ideas here. Just after introduction of the computers, computer-assisted instruction was the keyword, the buzzword in education, and everybody was looking at this, especially how this can facilitate learning and teaching, and so on, and e-learning within environments, virtual university in the late 1990s, but also the idea of the learning management system, which was then introduced also in the late 1990s to again facilitate and best show how learning can be fostered. Then we learned about massive open online courses, but also we learned about learning analytics, and especially in 2011. Which I looked at various publications in that year. Learning analytics was a new research era and a disruptive education element. But how did it, progress from that perspective to today, to 2016, in the last 5 years? That's what I want to talk about today. This is something I did in 2002 or 2003. I was looking at the learning management system Moodle. I think this is a screenshot of version 1.02, so the second iteration of Moodle, which came out. And I was going into the database of Moodle and thinking, okay, what happens in the database, and what our learners do at university level with that learning management system. There was no analytics dashboard of Moodle in that time, but the database included all the information. So I was looking at that, for example, where do the students log in from IP addresses, which means are they within the university's IP address or are they outside of the university's IP address? And I clearly found that students are using this outside of the university, these learning management systems, which was of course a positive response to the introduction of the LMS we did in 2002. And also we've been looking at what elements they use within the learning management system, but we also looked at what day and times they are using the learning management system in order to facilitate, for example, discussion board conversations, etc., etc. So this was basically my early steps into learning analytics from my perspective, and I used this information to feed it back to the learner. And that's exactly what learning analytics is about. It's not only looking at the data, but also then making sense of this data and feeding it back to the learner when they need it. So that's the idea of learning analytics. In 2011, Long and Siemens talked about learning analytics, and a very interesting article saying that there will be some applications which help the learners, to personalize and adapt their learning environment. This is a great idea, to really go into a learning environment whenever you feel like learning, and you get personalized and adaptive information and can use that to better progress in your learning journey. So does it work, is my question. In this article, there's also confusion of concepts. What is learning analytics again? And here's 3 ideas to it. The first one, if you talk about learning analytics, some people might understand, and these are the people basically coming from data science, they think about education data mining. Education data mining is something like looking at the process of extracting information from a database. Like I said before, I'm looking into Moodle database and get some information out of that database. So this is basically a report I can produce from education data mining. The second part would be the academic analytics. Here we are looking at identifying patterns in this educational data and use it for decision making at university level, for example, or at school level. So that's something which is very helpful for budgeting, for resource planning, for example, and it can really help us to move forward with our institutional perspective, with our organizational learning. And the third definition I would propose here is the learning analytics definition, which is looking at measurement, collection, analysis, and reporting of data about learners and their contexts, which means the environments, but then also understanding and optimizing their learning and also then the environments where it occurs. So that was proposed, that definition at the LEC conference, Learning Analytics Conference in 2011. And I think this is a very important definition where you also see that it's feeding back the information to the learner whenever they need it. In order to understand a little bit more about this idea of data, I've been looking at an additional definition saying that we use dynamic information. It's not only data, it's information we're using. So data might be referred to numerical information, which is stored in a database. But we're also looking at information which could be semantic information, which is the words the students are typing in the discussion boards. It's kind of a different understanding of what we're looking at in this perspective. So dynamic information is also, it's changing over time, which means that we can use, of course, this during one semester over and over again, but we also can use this on a second basis or a minute basis analysis. So dynamic is also evolving, as I said, over time. And again, we are trying to use this information for real-time modeling, which means we use this information in real time to feed it back to the learner, and not only after a semester, after a summative evaluation report. We try to, whenever the learner logs into a system, he or she might get updated in real time, which means whatever happens, there will be updates of the system. And this makes it rather complex overall, first of all, to handle this information, but also to collect the information. So we cannot only rely on this information in a non-reactive perspective, which means that all the data is logged in the background. We also need reactive responses from the learner. So how do you feel at the moment, for example? So this goes again back to the qualitative idea of learning analytics, that we want to understand what the learner is actually doing while learning. And this information is very important in terms of feeding back real-time information to the learner. So this definition might include more thoughts than the simplistic definitions we've been looking at that before. So going back to the analytics process, how does it work? For non-technical people, it might be just accessing information, whatever information there is. It's the response to a survey, it's the response to some emotional responses, or it could be also location information tracked through an iPad. It could be log files which are produced within the learning management system. All this information can be accessed through the analytics process. And then we try to validate and model using different algorithms. And that's another problem of learning analytics from my perspective. The algorithm cannot be static. It needs to be dynamic as well. And that adds another complexity level on the idea of learning analytics. We cannot just use one algorithm and use it over and over again. The algorithm also needs to be dynamic in order to respond to the needs of the learner, to the changing environment the learner is navigating in. Using all this information, we try to describe what happens at the moment in the learning process. We also try to discover new events in the learning process which never happened before and try to respond to that. But also we want to predict what happens next in the learning process to better help the student to move forward in its learning process. And all this is of course then feeded into a personalization and adaptation engine which is within the learning environment. And that learning environment can be a learning management system, it can be something else. We have to define where the information is fed back to the student. But based on all this information, the student gets personalized and adaptive help. So we need some ideas how we can do this. And there's three ideas on data modeling. The first one would be predictive modeling, which is we're looking at a model and we can interfere from that information we are collecting some aspects towards a goal. And depending on the student's behavior, there might be a student at risk. And prediction might give us some clues towards that risk. And we can build, again, interventions for the student. Structure discovery might be something which is also coming from machine learning, which is helpful in order to find new structures within the learning process. So whenever the student is changing over time, we might identify some problems the student facing, not coping with the literature he or she has to read. So there's some problems, and we find some structures within that information, and we might also then respond towards that end. And another thing is the idea of relationship mining, thinking about unexpected relationships or patterns in a large set of variables, and then moving that relationship to other people or other learners. And what you see here as this visualization, that's a self-structuring map, which is identifying new patterns within a large data set. That's a data set of over 1 million students learning within different learning environments. And this map is basically identifying with the different colors and the different shapes where students are at risk and where they come from. So you can drill into this information and get and identify new structures, and then feed back that information again to your adaptation engine. So that's the idea, but you need to be aware of all these different modeling techniques and data analysis techniques. So here's some idea on critical issues looking at learning analytics. First of all, we might look at stakeholders. So there's lots of stakeholders involved within the learning analytics idea. There might be people from institution level, but also the teachers and the learners. Others might be the learning designers, the instructional designers who are involved in the learning process development. We also look at different types of data, and I've been talking about this data already, but we're also looking at different objectives, of course, of learning analytics, and I've been going into this as well. But on the other side, there's lots of limitations and constraints when we apply learning analytics in institutions. For example, there's the acceptance question. Is the institution or each of the students, but also the teachers, accepting the implementation of learning analytics? Are they allowed to opt out of learning analytics? And what does it mean to opt out of learning analytics? These are big questions, of course, we have to ask when we start thinking about learning analytics and the introduction into the institution. Other things like external constraints might be the data security aspects and also ethical understanding of learning analytics and well, what is about the policies we have to implement at university level when we start looking at learning analytics. And the last one, well, the instruments, I think you can clearly say that implementing learning analytics might also require new infrastructure in terms of technology. All the algorithms need to be developed, large databases need to be developed and implemented, but we also look at different aspects of theories based on these instruments, new data technologies, etc., etc. So that's critical ideas around learning analytics, which is basically a starting point for institutions to look at learning analytics as a whole. When you step further and look at how to implement it, you might look at 3 different perspectives. The first one would be the student profiles you require as a databases. And there could be static parameters and dynamic parameters included in these student profiles. So this is basically a collection of lots of data and information from students. For example, the student's course they are enrolled in, and also the background of the student, the education background, etc., but also dynamic parameters which change over time, like the grades they produce throughout their learning journeys. The learning profiles is something like we are logging within the learning environment. All the behavioral data a learner is producing over time, over the learning process. And last, which is often forgotten within learning analytics conversations, is the curriculum profile. If we're talking about a formal learning process, we always have a clear static curriculum defined. We have learning outcomes defined. We have objectives, materials linked to the learning outcomes. And all this assessment, which is based on these learning outcomes, is clearly included into the curriculum. And this needs to be linked as well into a profile and, well, basically building a benchmark towards the student and the learning profiles. And all this information is required then to go into an analytics perspective and build, of course, which is the goal of learning analytics, interventions towards the individual student, but also to groups of students. But also it will address, of course, the other stakeholders like the institution or the learning designer, getting information out of this as well. So here's just an example, and it's not clear, it's too small, I know, but these are many variables of a student profile, just to give you a little insight into what does it mean to produce something as an institution. And this was a process we've been going through for almost a year when we started implementing learning analytics at our institution. And the idea was really starting at the heart of the formal learning process, which was the curriculum. And this is, of course, defined through governance and institution, and feeding into requirements and all the sequencing of learning objectives, but also towards the learning outcomes, looking at assessments. And all this information is basically stored in a curriculum definition element. So everybody who is designing a course needs to enter all the information here in this web interface. So we can link all the learning materials to assessment, but we also can link the learning materials to the learning outcomes. And so this will be the curriculum profile and well, building a benchmark towards the actual learning journey a student is going through, but also a teacher is using. So this builds basically the learning environment. Next, we have some characteristics which come into our equation, which is the learner characteristic, which would be all the information we are collecting, also about the interest, for example, of the student. This could be a reactive test we are using throughout the learning process. The student is saying, well, are you interested in reading this material? Yes or no, kind of ratings, you know, from web shops, etc. So there's lots of easy elements to get feedback out of this system, of course. We also look at academic performance, of course, and get information and feedback from the student in a reactive or also non-reactive way. So we are collecting lots of information about the learner and the characteristics of the learner. On the other side, we also have the teacher involved in this equation, where we also have an understanding about the domain knowledge of the teacher, the beliefs of the teacher, their teaching strategies. We understand how effective their classroom management is, how they respond to grouping and conversations within the learning environment. But we also understand how they will support the learning processes of the individual student or of the group of learners. All this information is very important in order to adapt and personalize the learning environment again. This information all feeds into the learning analytics engine. And this is the tricky part, of course, to have different parts of databases and different parts where the data is stored, and then feed it into this engine, which is kind of a long process to get the data right and unbiased data within this engine. And this engine is, again, using all these analytics approaches, looking at data mining approaches, but also looking at natural language processing, which means that we are looking at a discussion board and feeding this information into an analytics engine as well. All these algorithms, as I said before, are dynamic. So we cannot use static algorithms. Somebody is selling to a university or to a school and hope that this works out well. I have some empirical evidence just in a few minutes. But we also use predictive analytics here, or comparison analytics, to build some understanding of the data we've been collecting through all this information, and towards the benchmark of the curriculum, of course. So what we can do, and what most institutions are capable of, is the reporting engine. So we build reports, static reports, at the end of a semester, at the end of a school year, and get some information in a heat map, for example, or we have graphs or automated reports which include several numbers of success rates and fail rates and drops and other aspects here. So that's easy to handle. That's a static report, and it's just using the data available and building a report out of it. This can be very helpful for different stakeholders again. It can be helpful for the institution to understand what's happening within a semester or a school year, but it can be also very helpful for the teachers to understand how the teaching practice is influencing the learning of the students overall. But it's not learning analytics, this reporting engine. Learning analytics starts here. We require a personalization adaptation engine, which is using this information and feeding it and crunching it so that it makes sense, that you can feed it back to the learning environment. And this happens in best as real-time responses. So implementing such a system is hard work, and implementing such a system also requires an interdisciplinary team. And that's a major requirement we are facing at the moment when we start introducing learning analytics. So we do not want to have only one person working on this. We want to have an interdisciplinary team working on this to make this happen. And that's a big load for an institution if you go this route of learning analytics. In most cases, well, then something like this ends up as learning analytics implementation. And that's what I understand is learning analytic, not a learning analytics approach. It's only this. So this is an example of how we started implementing this, and that's a simple architecture visualization of different analytics approaches and different databases we are using to feed this information back to the learner. And below on the left, on the left side, there's the student view where all the information is fed back to the student. So it's the student dashboard and the student support and interventions. And that's where personalization and adaptation is happening. And I have some insights how this looks like in a second. But we also have all this complex computations happening here from different sources of data and feed it back into the different profiles, like the learning profile and the curriculum profile, and initializing all this information, but also, well, bringing that information to the right spot at the right time. And that's intensive in terms of computation power. So we need to also time this computation at different times of the day. During the night, there's lots of computation happening as well, but there's also students working at night because they have to work on a day shift or whatever. So there's also a problem with downtimes of these systems. So we have to make sure that these systems run 24/7, and that's another big challenge, of course, when implementing such systems. So here's another view on the architecture, which is basically a global view of an institution, which showing all the interactions of data, and these are the major data lines which are included here. And you see it's getting already complex, and if you zoom into all these different elements, there will be many information stored and of course used in the analytics process. But still we have all the elements included. I've been talking before, and this is basically where we are at the moment starting to implement these infrastructures. But what we realized is, of course, that the implementation of learning analytics requires all these different specialized staff and technology capabilities. And in a study I conducted, we clearly identified a capabilities deficit, which means we've been looking at international institutions, over 150 institutions, and we've been asking them what do they have in terms of learning analytics, in terms of staff, for example. And you can see here the graph where staff is available at these over 150 international institutions. It was higher education institutions. Here, learning analytics specialists, over 50% say no, not available. Information management architect, which is of course a very important position to introduce all the databases and make databases talk to each other, not available. At many of the institutions, database analysts understanding what's happening within the databases and cleaning them and making them more higher performance like. They have something like that, but they are not focusing on analytics at the moment. They are, storing this information, the grades and everything, making that secure. Learning management system specialist, most of the universities have some position like that, and that's of course a good sign. On the other side, data scientists, not available that much at universities, but also the learning designer. Here we have positive responses, so we have lots of learning designers already involved, and they are also very important in terms of learning analytics because they design how the recommendations, how the adaptation, and how the personalized information feed it back to the learner looks like. They are the designers of all these elements. Looking at the technologies available, it's a similar picture, so most of the institutions don't have a larger data warehouse, they don't have automated data reporting, they're not looking at interactive dashboards, not having implemented any personalized help, etc., etc. So lots of things missing to be able to implement learning analytics at the institutions yet. So this is something we need to improve, and that's a study which was conducted last year. So we have to work a lot in order to be able to implement learning analytics on a high level. And this also requires a change management at the higher institution or also at a school, which means that you can, of course, climb this ladder here from basic reporting, which I said is happening at many institutions already, into dashboard reporting. So you build dashboards and use these dashboards to for different stakeholders, and the stakeholders can drill in the information and receive the information they would require. The cross-system data integration is a huge step as a next step here, which means that a customer relation management system, for example, is implemented at the university, which relates all the information of the teachers, and another system is included which relates all the information of the students. And now making these two elements talk to each other is one of these cross-system data integration. But also we need to integrate the LMS data into that whole learning analytics system. We need to integrate the curriculum profile information into that system, etc., etc. So there's many different isolated data at school or at university, and they're not talking to each other. And now this step is a huge step into data integration and towards learning analytics. The next one would be building the capabilities around analytics at all, and one of this would be the predictive analytics as well. And then just having these algorithms in place and having dynamic algorithms, then you would be able to adapt and personalize the learning environment in order to have this full cycle of learning analytics implemented. And the idea of openness would be then you start sharing this information, you start sharing your algorithms, you start sharing your data to provide a better understanding of how learning is happening in different domains, the different institutions, different places on the world. And that would be, in my understanding, the last step of the change management to really make learning open and also make data based on this learning open. So, but talking about data, it's something we require for learning analytics. And The idea here is that students expect learning analytics features to support their learning process, but also they are the producers of the data, and we should not forget if the students are not, of course, providing the data, learning analytics system will not work at all. So, but just go back to the students. What do they expect from the systems? And we did a qualitative study here, and inviting students and ask them what are things you would like to see in such a system. And here are some ideas the students came up with. So they want to understand their learning history, for example. So this would be one feature of learning analytics. So they want to see how they progress over time when they learn and what they learn. They also are interested in their activity time. So, so how long do they learn, for example, for one exam, and how long do they take for writing an essay, for example. They want to see recommendations in terms of what to read and what to do next. They also want to set their own goals towards A or B in a course, for example, and they want to follow up with that goal and see how they can reach the goal, for example. They want to connect, so it's the social element of learning here. It's something like the study buddy. They want to see, is there somebody else just working on a specific reading material, and can I connect with that person to clarify some questions, for example, using social media or also document sharing to get a better understanding and facilitate the learning process. They want to see self-assessments for different perspectives and different ideas here, but they also want to rate the content they're using. They want to see and make clear for the learning designer, for example, that this information, this learning material is redundant because they did it already in course A and now they're in course B following up the next semester and they have to read it again. So is that useful in terms of curriculum planning? No, it's not. So content rating would be something very important from the perspective of the students. They also want to see visual signals. They want to get alarm if there's something happening which shouldn't happen within the learning process. They are interested in news feeds from the university, but also beyond within their domain of study. They want to include a study planner, which is basically implemented in many institutions already. And the most important thing, all the students responded here in this qualitative study was looking at feedback. They want personalized adaptive feedback to the learning process when they need it. And they also want to say within the feedback, I don't want feedback now. I want only feedback when I require it and when I ask for it. So it's not something like you're logging in and you already get feedback. So you want also to have autonomy. So that's going back to motivation theory. As a learner, you want to feel autonomy in your learning and in your doing, but also on the other side, you want to have support whenever you require the support. So that's the idea of feedback students were responding in this qualitative study. And I think that's interesting insights, and there's more features they've been mentioning. And we are following up with that on a larger quantitative study now, looking at a larger evidence of what students really expect from different features of learning analytics. So here's an example of a pilot we implemented 3 years ago at Open Universities Australia. And this is exactly the thing I've been talking before, the learning analytics as a dynamic and personalized environment. Looking here at, for example, content recommendation. Whenever I enter this system, I get recommendations for reading materials, for example. And there's a small abstract in this dashboard showing a teaser of what I could read now, which is recommended for me for reading in my current learning process. Also visual signals, red would be, okay, I haven't read that before, so that's new material I have to read. There might be orange, okay, I've been going into this but not finished yet. There's something like a self-assessment to that material presented, so I can get an understanding, did I really understand what I've been reading, or is it something I have to, well, reread and relearn. There's some information we included on the performance level of the student, so the student could see how they perform in different courses and or different sequences of one course, for example. We implemented some predictive course mastery, so they could see where they are compared to others. So that's surely a critical issue, but some students also recommended this in terms of getting a better understanding of where they are at the moment. Also, things like highlighting social interaction, like the study bodies I mentioned before, or recommended activities, what else they could do. That's something we implemented in a pilot and also empirically tested this pilot in different perspectives. And of course, students can personalize this environment, so they can add more content recommendation, for example, or they can add more related conversations to their topics. If they're studying different courses, they can adapt the environment for a single course or together for the whole study year, etc., etc. So there's lots of personalized elements here as well. So there's also a dashboard for students, for teachers. For example, teachers can see students at risk, or they can see the engagement of the student. So that's behavioral data reported here. They can monitor the students, handing in assignments, etc., etc. So there's many opportunities here as well, and also the teacher can personalize this environment to better understand what's happening within the individual course, but also within a series of courses they are teaching, and optimize their teaching practices through that. So that's basically a professional development over time. So now you're asking, okay, we want learning analytics, but how can we convince somebody at our institution to implement learning analytics? And there's some ideas. We might take three perspectives: summative, real-time, and predictive perspective, and build benefits out of that. And here's a matrix we came up with, developing, asking experts what would they expect from learning analytics on different perspectives, but also for different stakeholders. And you can start in one of these cells here and say, okay, this is one argument we might use for implementing learning analytics at low level. We want to have summative learning analytics at a student level. So that might be the easiest way for us to, with our current infrastructure, to start off. And then we will make our way through all these cells and build a full system of learning analytics requirements for our institutions are included. And next would be the learning designer, for example. Learning designer might be real-time information required here. So we go into comparing learning designs, evaluate the learning materials, see the ratings of the materials, for example. And so the learning designer can build new materials, new interventions, etc., etc. So there's something for everyone here, I believe, also for the political decision makers at the institution to go with and say, okay, this is something we want to implement at our institution, and then we take this and see how can we reach that goal of the benefits matrix. So that's something you could start with, looking at all these benefits and then building your analytics system at your institution. But overall, of course, if we don't have information available, we cannot produce this benefits. And students are producing, of course, this information, and but also they are very passive in terms of what to do with that information if it's not personalized and adaptive environment. So if they only receive a dashboard with static information about, statistics and graphs they see, well, that's not useful, of course. They want to have prompts and feedback which is semantic rich, which helps them in feeding towards the learning process. So that's what students want. And that also influences the idea of sharing the information the students are producing. So we've been going into a study looking at students and asking them, okay, are you willing to share this information for a learning analytics system? And if yes, for what type of system? So here's information they want to share. So they're happy to share assessment information. So their grades, basically. They're happy to share their name, their motivation, which is currently towards a specific course. They're happy to share their learning strategies, and also they are happy to share their course enrollment, which is, in this semester I've been enrolled in several courses. They do not want to share any information about their health situation. They do not want to share income information, external data, and family status, which is obvious, but they also do not want to share their online user path. And that's kind of very important information we require for the learning environment and also for the learning analytics systems. So if we do not have behavioral information about the learner when they log in, what they download, what they use as materials in terms of the self-test information, etc., well, this is missing information, and this would lead to a biased system, basically algorithms not working, personalized adaptive feedback not working. So that's a big problem. So we have to look at the student again, at the individual student, and understand basically this privacy calculus. So there's different factors influencing the concern over privacy and the idea of sharing the data. Maximizing factors in terms of concern would be, okay, data is shared with other institutions, with people I do not want my data is shared with. That's something we have to clearly identify as a problem at the institution which is implementing learning analytics. So we have to understand that we have to be transparent in terms of what data is used and what data is shared, and at what times data is basically also produced in terms of algorithms. Minimizing factors would be something we open up all these algorithms, and the student can drill down into information and understand what the algorithms is really doing, but also the student might understand which data is actually used for producing this information the student is receiving in the system. So that's a minimizing factor. And so we have to look at all these minimizing and maximizing factors in terms of concern over privacy and data sharing to build up the most effective system for learning analytics. Another issue is here the expected benefits, and students might have other expectations towards learning analytics systems than other stakeholders like the teachers or the institution chairs, etc. So looking at this privacy calculus, this can help us to understand what students think about data sharing, but also understand what the teacher is understanding, because there's different but similar also concerns over privacy from a teacher's perspective. So this might be an important theoretical framework towards sharing of data and using of data within the systems. So a last idea I want to briefly address here before I close is the idea of idiosyncrasies within the data we are collecting. So here's a data set, over 1 million student enrollments here. We've been looking at 8 different universities, and we compared if there is a prediction algorithms we used over these 8 universities in terms of predicting pass and fail rates. Does it work for all institutions the same? And again, no, it's not. So we have to really be careful in terms of static algorithms here. So we would require dynamic algorithms. This is what these results show, and that's the support vector machines approach, which showing that, for example, University 1 had a predictive power of 81% in terms of pass-fail rates we are predicting, and University 6 only 76%. So we have quite a significant difference here in terms of predictive pass and fail rates. So we are building up more errors at University 6 than at University 1. And that's an important issue here. So we have to really address the institutional perspectives here when implementing learning analytics algorithms. Also the same for the different subjects. We also found here significant differences in terms of predictive power of the algorithm. So again, we need to have different algorithms for different subject domains, for different courses, even go into the individual courses, which is a big requirement here. Also, over the semester, we gain predictive power, of course, towards the end of the semester in terms of pass-fail prediction. So that's natural because we are adding more information, more data, and the learning progression gets more visible. So just to close, I have 5 ideas which you may take home as a message, but also you may take into this session starting at 10 in the same room, where you can ask me questions about what I've been presenting today. So one would be the question of unbiased modeling. So learning analytics modeling and interventions need to be sound and free from bias, and that's one perspective. And the question is, how can we really guarantee for that? The second one would be it needs to be transparent in terms of all the data we are collecting and the applied algorithms, and what are the policies behind this transparency. That's another question we can have a conversation about later on. A third one would be the question of acceptance. So when we start implementing learning analytics at the institution, there needs to be an acceptance of the benefits for all the stakeholders, and how can we focus on these acceptance. The fourth one would be semantics. The idea of not only looking at numerical data, but also looking at rich semantic information, looking at essays of the students, looking at responses in discussion boards, and using a natural language approach to understand what is within that semantic qualitative information, and can we use that as well for learning analytics. That's a big challenge here, but I believe we can also solve this challenge. And the last one would be the evidence, and I'm inviting everybody in this room, of course, also to address the idea of building empirical evidence towards learning analytics, and build new studies, report next year at media about your studies you're conducting in learning analytics, and help the field to evolve within this space, but provide empirical evidence that it's working, that it's useful. So, and I'll close with this: student engagement and success does not arise by chance, for sure, and we are all asked to help towards the success of our students and the success of our research. So if you're interested, go to my website and check out some books I've been publishing over the last few years. And thank you very much again for your invitation, and looking forward to our conversation in 30 minutes.